So, on this Thursday morning, the Home Secretary has backed the use of force to deal with disruptive activists. This after Just Stop Oil stormed Wimbledon twice in 2 hours yesterday.
A protester threw jigsaw pieces bought on the site and confetti around the court as the Home Secretary hosted a summit of police and sport bosses to discuss trying to prevent these sorts of disruptions. Well, Suella Braverman met representatives from the Premier League, the Lawn Tennis Association and Silverstone, where the British Grand Prix will take place this weekend. Well, let's speak to former Brexit Party MP and political commentator Ben Habib, who joins us in the studio this morning. Good morning to you,
Good morning.
Ben. I think the obvious question is it really possible to police this kind of thing? I mean, we're seeing almost Wimbledon being ruined in terms of the queues that are resulting because of these checks, and yet the protesters have bought items on site and used those to disrupt play. I mean, do we just have to resign ourselves to the fact that, you know, let's not ruin life for everybody in policing this?
I mean, I would take the opposite approach, Isabel. I'd have zero tolerance for these people. I thought Johnny Bairstow summed up the mood.
No, I'm not saying saying be tolerant of them. I'm saying, how do you police against someone who buys a jigsaw on site? I mean, it's almost impossible.
Yeah, well, first of all, I think the government has it within its means to declare the organisation illegal. You know, it's using intimidation, in a sense, to promote its political ideology. And at its very fundamental basis, that is terrorism. I know it sounds absurd, but that actually is the definition of terrorism, intimidation, you know, to promote a political ideology. And Just Stop Oil have gone over the top repeatedly, haven't they? They've broken the law every time they do this sort of thing. They bind themselves to, what do they call those gantries above motorways, causing massive disruption. Vandalised paintings.
But Ben, at this stage, this is where I get people who will say, but in this country, we have a proud tradition of protest.
Yeah, but it's got to be peaceful protest without inconveniencing the public at large.
Yes.
And they've gone too far. They've made their point. And by the way, I think they're damaging their position. Anyone watching Just Stop Oil now, I'm sure, is being pushed against the organisation, not feeling greater sympathy for the movement to Just Stop Oil, which, by the way, as we know, those of us who are sane, which clearly doesn't include the 66 and 68-year-old couple who went on the tennis court yesterday, those of us who are sane, no, you can't stop oil. What do they want to do? Take us back to year zero in terms of economic progression? Because that's what it means. You know, if you just stop oil, the country just stops. We all die, frankly. That's what the net result of their aim is. You know, so the whole thing's absurd. They need to be dealt with, I think, incredibly robustly.
And we will be speaking to somebody from Just Stop Oil later on, and they'll put their argument. But I presume they would say, nobody is listening. We are shouting in the wind. We're becoming more and more frustrated, hence why we're doing more and more of these protests. We've just this week had the hottest day globally on record. We've just had the hottest month since records began last month. Well, that's
so
what
cool.
the Met Office and, you know, the experts who know more than I do about this have said.
They're making it up, Isabel. It's been freezing. It's cold outside.
We're talking about the global picture and obviously the warming of the seas, which you wouldn't notice on a daily basis, and it's all done on a mean of the average across the month and across the world. But, you know, do they have a point? Is that a legitimate argument that actually we've all become a bit sort of fatigued about hearing about climate change and we've stopped actually thinking about the impact it's going to have on our children and grandchildren?
Well, I don't know if the populace at large is fatigued. I'm definitely fatigued by it. And, you know, I was born, as Eamon was, in a generation where reduce, recycle and reuse were the 3 R's that my parents used with me all the time. You know, bottles were given back so they could be reused. Switches were switched off as you left the room.
Done.
Things were repaired.
Things were repaired.
Yeah.
You didn't get a brand new side to a car every time you had a little dent. And, you know, all of that's good. All of that's sensible. Of course, reduce your carbon emissions. But what you mustn't do is have a political ideology which economically emasculates you in the pursuit of what you see to be the greater good for the world. And I think America is a very good lead in this. You know, America, as you know, announced recently the Inflation Reduction Act, which is the biggest financial commitment to the drive towards net zero, $370 billion. But they do it from a position of strength, being the biggest producer of oil and gas in the world. So they underpin their economy, they make sure that they're energy independent, and then with that strength, they're going for for carbon emissions reduction. Whereas we in the UK turned our back on the North Sea reserves that we have, signed this North Sea transition deal back in 2021, decided we're going to give up fossil fuels ahead of having adequate renewables to replace them. And one of the consequences of that is, of course, embedded inflation now, because we can't meet our needs
and
as a
energy
country.
security.
And energy security, which is fundamental. And there's talk about, rationing going on this winter, energy rationing. I mean, how can that happen?
But then you've got ministers quitting, saying, accusing the government of not being green enough and turning their back on the green agenda.
Well,
someone like Zach Goldsmith saying
Zach needs to grow up, doesn't he? You can't say the government's not doing enough. By 2027, any building in this country which isn't EPCC rated, that's Energy Performance Certificate C rated, will not be capable of being leased, will not be allowed to be leased. That includes 60% of all commercial buildings in the UK. By 2030, you've got to get that up to B. 80%, get your head around this, 80% of all UK commercial property, shops, offices, leisure, cinemas, everything, 80% will be incapable of use in 2030 without significant capital expenditure between now and then. That is a massive burden on the British economy. And we're going to ban hybrid cars by 20. We were all encouraged to buy hybrid cars, do you remember?
Yeah.
Hybrid cars was a solution. And I think they're a great idea because you've got the best of both, if you like, a bit like the US's approach to net zero. That's going to be banned in 2030. By 2035, you won't even be allowed to drive a fossil fuel car. We're going down this road, absolutely, this cul-de-sac, I should say, with utter commitment, without really considering what the economic impact is. And we're beginning to feel it.
So if you had a ticket for Court 18 or whatever yesterday, and you'd saved up, you'd got to Wimbledon, you'd taken a day off work, the weather was intermittent, but play was going ahead, what would your reaction have been to those two old goats that climbed on to the court and did what they did?
Well, what I would be
older than you.
I know, so I could take them on.
Yeah.
I mean, I know what I'd be thinking. I'd be pretty damn furious sitting there watching them. And I'd want to do all sorts of things to them which are unrepeatable on a morning show in particular.
And do you think that would be representative of the crowd that were there?
I would have thought so. What do you think?
I think you're right, yeah. I think you're right.
It's like, come on, guys, this is a game of tennis.
Yeah.
You want to make a protest, take it to Westminster. Or,
well, exactly. I think that's what Suella Braverman's big challenge is going to be. She's obviously condemned what happened yesterday, and all eyes turning now to Silverstone and the F1, and Silverstone saying that they're going to put out 12,000 spies at the weekend to try and stop protesters from sabotaging the race. And
tell you what, that's a dangerous thing. I mean, to interfere with Formula One cars, I mean, that's can be life and death for everybody involved.
It would be, yeah, and not just for the protester.
Yeah.
They cause a lot of, collateral damage.
Yeah, so that is a difficult one to police. All of these things will be difficult to police, and very embarrassing for her yesterday that she's holding this summit and all of this goes on in such a high-profile way. The thing that amuses me, we have all the security, yet these guys were wearing Just Stop Oil T-shirts. Why did nobody see that?
And if they've got confetti in their pants, how do you stop them getting
That's a big bulge you have there.
I can't bear the thought of my mum turning up at SW19 and having her pants checked before she goes to Wimbledon. We can't let that happen. And I think we just have to...
What was the story about the jigsaw?
So they bought a jigsaw on site at Wimbledon, and now Wimbledon has withdrawn all on-site jigsaws.
So the jigsaw was just an awkward thing when
because they needed stuff to use as their kind of part of their protest. But
jigsaws are the new WMD.
Yes.
What do you do? Do you ban strawberries next, or what? We can't sort of change our lives
you
because
just ban
of
protesters. That's what you do.
I'd ban the organisation. I would ban Just Stop Oil.
Yeah.
Interesting. Well, that's what Ben Habib would do. What would you do? Let us know your views. Do you have any sympathy for what the Just Stop Oil protesters are talking about? Maybe you just object to the way they go about it. Maybe you just think they're absolute nutcases. We're going to have one of them in the studio. What time are we having? What time are we having the Just...
8 o'clock. So, yes, send in any questions for Just Stop Oil and we'll put them to them direct from the people.